What is good, Tesla family? It's Ray J back with another video, and in this one, I'm going to be talking about the one and only Tesla stock and break down the earnings report for each and every one of you because Tesla just announced their earnings, and we have some very important things to discuss in this video. Now, before I break anything down about the earnings, how did they do when it comes to deliveries, their earnings per share, their revenue, and all that good stuff, I got to mention a couple of things real quick before starting. Firstly, I'm not a financial planner. Don't take any of this as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please smash the like button if you want to see more videos like this. It not only benefits me, it benefits the entire Tesla community as a whole. And the last things, if you guys can, please check out the Webull link down below and in the description. If you sign up for Webull, the link down below, and deposit any amount of money into the account, you're guaranteed 6 free stocks, each worth up to $3,500. And you can always sell these 6 free stocks for cash and use that cash to buy some Tesla shares for free. It's a limited time offer. It ends in just 4 days, so please check it out before they run out. With that out of the way, let's get on with the video. So Tesla's currently just a little bit green in the after hours, up about 0.4%. Earnings just came out. So I want to talk about some very big announcements that came out. Now, I am recording this about, I would say, 1 hour after the report came out and about 2 hours after the market closed. So if there are other big announcements, I might not actually get everything in this video, but I'm going to report on some of the most important things you need to know and how this could affect Tesla's share price for the future. So firstly, we had the big numbers come out, the earnings per share and the revenue. So the revenue grew actually 42%, but the margins actually declined to the worst we've seen in over a year. That's not necessarily Tesla's fault because remember, all right, Tesla's future is very bright. They're an absolutely incredible company, but in Q2, we had the lockdowns in China, and that did end up having a very dire effect on the company. Also, we had the supply chain constraints, so all those things combined are what did have a negative effect on Tesla and the company going forward. So looking down right here, if you look at earnings per share, we got a result of $2.27 instead of the expected $1.81, according to the source. The revenue was $16.93 billion. That's actually a little bit lower than the $17.1 billion expectations, almost the exact same, so it's not really that bad. And if you look at the gross margin, it actually came a little bit down compared to its quarter at 27.9% instead of 32.9% from last quarter and 28.4% a year ago. So it did actually see a bit of a decrease, and that was due to many different constraints out there. Overall, if you look at the data, we could see that the energy sector, it made up almost a very similar percentage of their revenue. But if you look at their services and other, uh, revenue that kind of came from that segment, we could see this actually increased a bit for the quarter. And overall, the total automobile revenues did make up a large chunk of their overall revenue. So it just goes to show that there's a bit of a difference in their services. They did actually expand on that for the second quarter. And I do expect this to continue to grow going forward as we have more and more improvements. Now, from the actual data itself, there are some things that were not that great and other things that were a lot better I have to talk about. Overall, Tesla was cash positive. We had a free cash flow of about $621 million in Q2. Very good overall. They were cash flow positive as well for the quarter, but they would have been negative if it wasn't for what they did. And this is what the headlines are also talking about. Tesla sells $936 million worth of Bitcoin in the second quarter. And unfortunately, that is something they had to do. Some people could say it's out of desperation. That's because Tesla would have been cash flow negative if they didn't make this move. And that could be a little bit concerning for some investors because this was something very bold they had to do. I think that was like 75% of their Bitcoin or something like that. And this is something they had to do to really keep earnings afloat because if their cash flow was negative, that would have been very bad. And they still powered it through. And it's not something to be too kind of like worried about because Tesla has a plan to really offset the issues that they're facing. So if you look at what the summary showed, they kept on progressing in the second quarter of 2022. They were limited by the shutdowns in Shanghai, not to mention supply chain constraints. And also, overall, they had a positive cash flow, free cash flow, which is pretty good. Their overall margins did drop a bit, but they're making a lot of progress in Berlin, not to mention in other places. And we are seeing very big improvements with their sales and so on and so forth in Austin. So overall, I do think this was a little bit more good than bad, but it wasn't necessarily that great considering other things like that. If you look at their financial summary year over year, we did see a bit of an increase. It wasn't like as great as some people would have thought. And when it comes to their expenses, we did see right here it was a bit of a decrease overall compared to Q1, but that's because they did produce a lot less cars and so on and so forth. So overall, not necessarily bad when it comes to the financial side. What was a little concerning was their cash flow being negative. If it wasn't for them selling the amount of Bitcoin they sold, it would have been negative, but it ended up being positive just because of that. So you could tell that they did get hit by some massive things. We did see some decreases here and there. If you look at net cash flow by the operating activities, once again a bit of a decrease relative to the last quarter. One of the lowest we actually saw since, well, what is that, like Q2 of 2021? So very, I mean, it's not great to see things like this happen as their margins took a big hit, but I am still very optimistic because we are seeing a big improvement. So right here, you could see when it comes to profitability, we got a Bitcoin impairment. Once again, same old thing over again. When it comes to their overall deliveries and production so far, we have 254,000 cars that were delivered and 258,000 that were produced. Once again, pretty good. And the majority of them actually came from the Model 3 and Model Ys overall. So it goes to show how popular they are and how much Tesla is able to produce those. And we haven't seen, I think this part is actually very important. I'm going to talk about this in just a bit. Overall, when it comes to other pieces of data, we saw a big increase in their solar deployments. So right here, you can see energy storage went up big time. Also, solar deployments increased 25% year over year. Once again, very good for the company. The energy sector and services did increase as a part of the segment of their revenue. Once again, very good. So anyways, we have some nice pictures right here. We can see the whole team right over there. We had the big grand opening of the Berlin Gigafactory, them working on the cars, and they have very nice looking paint shops because the whole factory is kind of like it's a very simplified factory where you enter and you insert parts from one end and the car comes out on the other end. So it's very integrated and it really helps them so that different sectors are kind of like on a consecutive supply a line instead of them having to be in separate sectors. So that's a very big improvement they made. Better cast systems and things like that. This is the Giga Texas. It's massive, looks very awesome, and the future is very promising. Now, when it comes to the long-term future, there's something very good I wanted to talk about, and it's this right over here. It's almost very similar to what I told you guys yesterday about what Emmanuel Rosner, the analyst, ended up saying. And this right over here, this report is showing the same thing. Tesla reports a massive increase in production capacity across all of the factories. So they're actually able to produce even more when it comes to their capacities. So we have two important charts right here. I'm going to compare them in a second. Right here on the left, you could see we have the end of Q1 2022. So that's this right here. So Q1 of 2022, the Model S and the Model S and Model X in California had a capacity of 100,000. For the 3 and Y, 500,000. For Shanghai, it has 450,000 or just even more than that. And also for Berlin and Texas, they were just in the early ramps of production. So this was for Q1 of this year. Let's look at Q2 now. What are we seeing in Q2? So if we compare the California side, we have 100,000 Model S and Model X, same thing as this one from Q1. And then in Q1, we had 500,000 as the capacity for the Model 3 and Model Y in California. It's now 550,000. So it increased by 50,000, which is very good. If you look at Shanghai, Shanghai is a monster. The Gigafactory there is huge. It went from 450,000 in capacity for Q1 to over 750,000. That's absolutely fantastic. That's very amazing. I can't wait to see how their numbers end up for the end of the year. And then if you look at what they're now capable of producing in Berlin and Texas, they went from being in the early stages of production to now being able to produce over 250,000 250,000 in both Berlin and Texas. So we're seeing a massive increase in their capacities, and I think they're going to have a very strong Q3 and Q4 reports. The only thing that could really slow them down, in my opinion, is if there are any more of these lockdowns, which I find to be very unlikely. And on top of that, the other thing could be supply chain constraints. But I do think the issue is kind of slowing down a bit, and I do think it's going to be very, very amazing overall for Tesla as they improve. So for me personally, this earnings report is showing that the future is super, super bright, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the share price is just going to explode in a straight line up for the next 6 to 12 months. This means that I do actually anticipate a little bit of downside to come for the markets, maybe as soon as a Friday, or maybe more on, like, I'd say Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday of next week. Because remember, we have the FOMC meeting coming out on the 27th of July. That's exactly 1 week from now. And we're going to find out if the Fed is going to raise the federal funds rate by 75 basis points or 100 basis points. And the market hasn't fully priced in 100. Now, 75 seems most likely, but there is going to be fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and some kind of like apprehensive behaviors from market makers and big institutions that may actually lead to a lot of downside going into the next trading week. And another thing that's important about that is the markets have a tendency of pricing in some of the future outlooks they're seeing for the markets. So we are most likely going to see a bit of a dump, in my opinion, for the early days of next week. Now, is that the end of the world? Not necessarily, but I want to actually kind of paint this picture for you. So if we look at SPY, let me actually find SPY, which is like right here. If you look at SPY, okay, the SPY was pushing up pretty hard, which is awesome. I mean, it still has the potential to even fill the gap up here at 400, but I don't see much more after that, because if you look at SPY carefully, let me actually pull up 2 hour candles to show you. The SPY has a gap down here at 382. We have another gap at 378, and the lowest one we have as of right now is all the way down in the 368 level. So it looks like the SPY is bound to fill these gaps pretty soon, in my opinion, considering we have the FOMC meeting, considering that the Fed may have to be even more aggressive, possibly, and the market hasn't fully priced that in just yet. So with that said, I wouldn't be surprised, as history has shown us, as we approach those FOMC meetings, we've seen dumps like this, massive dumps just like this. I don't like to spread fear into your guys' minds, but it is the uncomfortable truth. I think that the market may take a bit of a hit next week, particularly Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, as we approach the big day, as the FOMC meeting starts and Jerome Powell makes big announcements. With that said, I mean, the NASDAQ is very similar. I can actually show you the NASDAQ just real quick. Very similar gaps on the NASDAQ. We have a gap down here. We have another one. I think we actually filled the other one. We have another one way down here at that 10,800 mark. I don't know if the NASDAQ is going to drop that hard, but it most likely will come right back down to where this red line is, and maybe even back to this zone around that 11,000 flat range. So I am anticipating downside for the NASDAQ as well a little bit later. I think that there is some good news involving supply chains and things like that. $50 billion in funding from the Senate. They passed a bill to really do that. So Nasdaq could rally tomorrow a little bit, maybe kind of trade a little sideways, but going forward, as we approach next week, I do think the Nasdaq's going to dump as well, and I do think this will have an effect on Tesla. So what is Tesla going to do? In my personal opinion, it's very hard to tell exactly what it's going to do from this report. It's not necessarily a great report. It's not a bad one either. The only bad thing, or like the biggest bad thing I saw, was what happened to their margins, and also the fact that they would have been cash flow negative if they didn't end up selling like 75% of their Bitcoin. So with that said, I think that Tesla is, even if it makes a bullish move, if this thing does push up, we have a gap fill around 772. I mean, I can't guarantee we're going to fill it, but if we do that, that's awesome. But I want to prepare you guys for traps, because typically when Tesla has earnings like this, we get a big move up, then we get dumped a little bit later. And I do think that's most likely going to come, especially with the FOMC meeting. So my prediction is Tesla might make some bullish moves, maybe a few bullish moves here and there. Maybe we'll go as high as 772, maybe 780. I think it was a pretty good earnings. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad, it was just okay, maybe pretty good. And later on, all right, don't get too excited about a very bullish move. Don't fall for the traps. I anticipate downside to come. All right, especially next week. How low will Tesla go? I mean, we could still respect this wedge that's right over here, this pennant. So we could always come back to that 680 to 690 range if we start dumping going into next week, which I think we most likely will. With that said, regardless of what happens, I anticipate downside for Tesla. I really hate to put it out there like this, but that's what typically happens. But it's not the end of the world. The last thing I wanted to talk about is this right here. Right here, we can see right here, Elon Musk did actually tweet about this too. We have the shareholder vote guide, and Tesla shareholders, if you haven't voted already, it's recommended to do that because they have their shareholders vote based on how many shares they have for management recommendations for the company. So please look into this. I'm not going to kind of influence your votes. Just do what you have to do, and just it's very good to participate in things like this. You should also read their 2022 proxy statement. And the last thing I want to talk about is look. Short term, yep, the market may be bearish. We may see some big hits. Tesla's probably going to dump relatively soon with the overall market. I know it's hard to hear, but that's how I see this. But it's not the end of the world because this earnings report is very promising for the long term future, as we are going to see a big increase in the production capacities and production of Tesla. So I do think they're going to have a very strong earnings for Q3 and Q4 in terms of deliveries and so on and so forth. I think they're going to make a very good comeback, and they have many bright years to come. Short term, maybe we're a little bearish. Long term, I'm very, very bullish still. Nothing changes whatsoever. Now, the market is very chaotic. I think things often give people headaches. So I want to share this with you. This is something very funny Elon Musk put on his Twitter page. We could see there's a picture that someone kind of tweeted of Musk next to a dog, and we could see some striking similarities. And Musk actually tweeted that his calves are bigger though. So almost the same, except Musk has bigger calves. And another thing that's funny is he did go on a trip where he was actually on a boat. I think he went swimming, but later on he tweeted like right after that he was back in the gigafactory to work. Just goes to show how hard he really works. So all jokes aside, huge shout out to Elon Musk for all the work he does. We all appreciate everything he's doing for humanity and the future, and it really pushes each and every one of us to be our best selves. So never give up on your dreams. Right, the markets may be bearish short term, the long term is bright, and it will be full of memes. And we can basically guarantee we'll have more laughs from Elon Musk to come. With that said and done, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I hope you learned a lot about the earnings, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. I'll see you guys in the next one. Tesla to the moon, and peace out.